there, STEM enthusiasts. I'm Courtney, and welcome back to the STEM Spark podcast, where we ignite curiosity, creativity, and confidence in every learner through science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. Okay, guys, today we are diving in to a fun and thought-provoking topic. What if? What if STEM experiences? These are those what if questions and scenarios that challenge us to imagine something different, experiment a little, and explore STEM concepts in new and exciting ways. You know, asking what if is at the heart of every scientific discovery and engineering breakthrough. It pushes us beyond what we know into the world of possibility, creativity, and innovation. So in today's episode, we'll explore how these what-if scenarios can ignite curiosity, deepen understanding, and inspire both kids and adults to think like scientists and engineers. Let's jump in. So let's start with, what is a what-if STEM experience? Simply put, what if STEM experiences invite us to question and experiment with changes in variables or conditions to see what might happen. So for example, what if plants could grow without sunlight? What if you built a bridge using only paper? What if gravity was twice as strong? These questions spark imagination and motivate hands-on exploration. It also helps us to realize that we have to have some prior knowledge before jumping in. If we pose the question, what if plants could grow without sunlight? We first need to understand what sunlight actually does for plants in order to help it grow. And so this is a great way to get kids potentially interested in something they wouldn't normally necessarily be interested in. And so them having a creative outlet in this way could also spark some intrigue into the actual science of how it does work. And then what could take the place of that, or how could it shift to be different? And so I love using videos. I think a lot of us are very visual learners. And so YouTube is your friend. You can find all kinds of videos that have really great content. I also like to put in, like when I do my search, what grade level or what age bracket you're working with. And so that helps populate videos that are geared in a more simple term or more complex terms, just based on your students and what they need. So that's a great resource. All right, so once we pose these questions and we start sparking that imagination, getting those creativity juices flowing, it is super fun to watch kids just kind of, I love seeing like how their personality kind of guides this. And so it's really interesting to see how they think about these things and where their brain kind of goes to first. It's really cool to kind of see that thought process. So if you're doing this with a small group of kids, or even in a classroom where there's maybe a larger group of kids, I would encourage you to have them take a few quiet moments and do some independent thinking first. This allows every student the opportunity to really think about what they think first, and then they can share out and trade ideas and collaborate and all kinds of things like that. But I do love having, even if it's just a couple minutes, for them to kind of think through their own process on that. All right. So, why should we use what if questions in STEM style learning? So, what if questions encourage critical thinking? So, kids learn to predict outcomes, they test hypotheses, they can analyze results. It also helps them to think about things differently than how they have in the past. And so, that critical thinking component definitely comes into play, especially if you have given them some of that background knowledge. So they know how sunlight affects plants. Now they're thinking critically about that process and saying, okay, what could take that place? Or how could plants grow without that component, kind of thing. And so they really are taking it to a whole nother level, even though the innovation and creativity is kind of the driving force. These are components that are definitely within this kind of realm. Another part of this is it inspires research. So I have watched a lot of kids take the question and just run with it. They just have created their own imaginary world and different things where Twizzlers make the plants grow, whatever it is. And some kids really love to dig into the research aspect of like, why do plants grow? What causes them to grow? What other factors cause plants to grow? So I really love that what if questions help students to need that background knowledge, whether it's about the plants, whether it's about sunlight, thinking about some of the other examples, bridge design, physics, gravity, the solar system even, and how gravity changes based on where you are in the solar system. It helps kids that aren't naturally researchers want to gain the information they need to help them solve the problem and get to the point where they could have a viable solution, right? And so scaffolding that within your population of students and helping them with different resources, whether it be print materials, whether you're doing some research online, or those trusty YouTube videos are a great source. There's also some very cool science content sites. So if you're a teacher and you teach science or do different types of experiments within that science realm, there are some really great resources out there that I will put in the show notes for you to look at. Another thing that What If STEM helps is it promotes creativity. And if you've listened to any of my podcasts before, you know I am a huge proponent of creativity. Creativity is the driving force, I think, of everyone. And I think we are all creative on some level within certain realms, right? And so I think this promotes creativity in the sense that it invites learners to think outside the box and consider multiple possibilities. And especially with those super creative kids, it gives them it almost is like it takes the borders off of science and what science is, and it allows them to pull in those other skills that they feel really confident in and apply them to a more linear type of thinking. And so I think that these types of questions are really great at kind of bridging those two worlds of logic and creativity. And so it's really, I just love it. Another thing it does is it builds resilience. So with certain things like the paper bridge, they're not all going to work the first time. They they will have to try again. It will inevitably not be the best solution the first time out. And so it does build that resilience and that ability to really analyze what they did, see where it may have not worked the best or where it actually failed, and then say, okay, what do we need to do with this part to make it have more stability or more stable or what have you. And so I think that is a huge factor, in STEM, but honestly, guys, in life. We have to have resilience. Our kids have to have resilience. Also, I talk about this a lot in my classroom, but perseverance, like pushing through when it gets hard, when it gets frustrating, when you're like, it doesn't work, it's never gonna work. We all come to those moments where we're just like, this may never work. But we also can go back to the old adage, well, I found 1,000 ways not to build the light bulb, right? And so we are learning, and that's something that I talk about quite a bit in my, especially elementary STEM classes, is even if you didn't achieve the goal you set out to achieve, were you still successful? And it's taken 2 years, but they are getting to the point where they can recognize success that doesn't look like solving the original problem. Their bridge may not have worked in the entire hour, which I try really hard to kind of guide that so they do have a successful outcome. However, it does happen, but they are starting to realize like, oh, well, we weren't able to do this, but we did do this, and that was really cool. And so having those kind of wrap up conversations at the end has been so fun to hear how they have one, been resilient, two, persevered even though it was a challenge, and three, being able to redefine what success, quote unquote success, looks like for this particular project. And so that's been super fun. And I also love the kids that are like, well, our project didn't work, but we all took care of each other and we were kind and we let everybody have a turn. And so I'm like, yes, you rock. That's amazing. And so even if it's just like a success of, I didn't throw the materials off the table or whatever it is, we can celebrate all kinds of different things, right? And then the last thing about why we would use this is it connects concepts. It helps learners see how different STEM principles interact in real life. And so bridging, again, making those bridges between different types of things, helping kids see how everything is so interconnected, I think is really, really amazing and necessary because as we all grow up and learn that things are very connected and things that you wouldn't even think you needed to know about later in life, you kind of wish you had paid a little more attention in that class, right? And so I love when we have the opportunity to help kids kind of see those connections in different scenarios. All right, so how do we try this? What do we do to try this what if kind of STEM exploration, either at home or in the classroom? Because this could apply to literally any situation with from one kid to 100 kids, right? So you pick a topic, maybe physics, biology, engineering, chemistry. It could even be something you have already learned and you want to do kind of like a check-in, or it could be something that you are currently learning and you want to kind of see where they go with it. Or you could even use this as like an introductory kind of thing of like, we're getting ready to start our space unit. Here's a question about gravity, So it really could be a wide variety of things. I also like surveying students, especially if you have just one student or a couple students, or maybe it is like a small group scenario. And so having them kind of pick an idea or a topic that they think would be fun could also increase your buy-in with this. I don't feel like I have a ton of students not wanting to buy in to these types of questions because it's so open-ended that there's not really a wrong answer. And that's another great thing for kids with different learning abilities, is having these opportunities where there's not a right answer. There are a million right answers. And so it gives those kinds of kids that maybe lack confidence or are gifted in different ways an opportunity to apply things that they're good at to a topic or a skill that maybe they feel like they're not as great at. And so I think that also helps to build their confidence in these types of skills, right? So pick a topic, however you want to do that. The second step would be to pose the question. So something that just simply tweaks one element of something that they're kind of familiar with. So a familiar experiment or scenario. You could have your students think of their own or work with a group to kind of decide. You could maybe give them the topic and then let them come up with something related to the topic. In a classroom scenario, I typically have surveyed them enough to know kind of the general direction of what they're interested in. And so I will typically just pose the question and let them kind of run with it. I will also say that if you have a different scenario, getting that input can be a critical piece. And also making sure that what you're talking about is on the correct level of where your students are. So we definitely have those kids that are younger and way more knowledgeable, super gifted. And then we have those kids that may be struggling with certain things. And so if your student has no clue what gravity even is, maybe start with a video on gravity or the earth or different things, and then start kind of posing the question. But making sure they have kind of some of the tools that they need in order to pose the question, answer the question, even think about the question is an important part of that. What is your question kind of set up? Okay, number 3, make a plan. So the students, I like to just dump your ideas, think about it. Again, I will do a few minutes for them to think on their own, and then they can talk with their group. I am a huge proponent of a plan. So writing something down, maybe drawing out some pictures. If they want at this point to do some further research, or maybe I'll show them a video at this point on the topic or the different factors involved. This would be a great time to maybe reinforce some vocabulary and talk about some of those types of things. And then if it is like an engineering or like a science experiment kind of thing, decide how to test it safely, simply with the materials you have available. This does not have to be, you can make it as grandiose as you prefer it to be or are allowed to do based on your budget and materials and such. However, if you are like me and you are on a literal shoestring budget, then these are the materials you have to be able to do this. And they have to kind of work within those parameters, which is not a bad thing. It helps that resiliency, that perseverance. It really does help in that creative aspect of like, well, I wanted this, this, and this, but these are what I have. So how can I kind of adapt and work with what I've got? Also, if you know ahead of time that these are the materials that you're going to allow them to use or have available to use, you could preface the plan phase with, okay, these are the materials you can include in your plan. And that kind of helps those kids that really have a hard time once they've put a thought on paper to change it. And so maybe taking that into consideration as well. All right, so they make a plan, they have a way to test it and build it. Try it out, experiment, observe, take notes. I don't do a ton of this in the classroom just because we have such a limited amount of time for things, but I think scientific journals are amazing. And if I had more time with my students, I really probably would start implementing something like that. You might even get students to do some math at this point, measuring, weighing, graphing, all kinds of different things. You could incorporate some technology by taking pictures, creating a video blog, having them dictate, like almost like a podcast of what they tried, what worked, how they fixed it, the end result. Like things like that are super great. If you're in the classroom and can send that home to parents, that is a huge win. All right, and then the last step would be reflect, and I'm gonna highly encourage you not to skip this step. So what happened? Was it what you expected? What new questions do you have if we did this again? What new questions would you want to kind of answer? Is there anything else you would like to research? This would be a great opportunity to add in some writing elements and some opportunities for that kind of written reflection piece. If I do a written reflection piece, it's typically like a scale, like they can do like a 1 to 5 scale. And it's typically the question around perseverance or whatever character trait we're working on that time. How well do you feel like you showed perseverance? 1 to 5, 1 to 3 if they're really young. Smiley face, straight face, sad face kind of scale. Or you can do a bigger scale, whatever you like. And then I typically, just because my time, I want to spend the bulk of my time experimenting and doing. So my wrap up is super short. It's typically like 1 sentence, or draw a picture of your end result, or what is one thing that went well. So it is not an in-depth kind of reflection just for my purposes. If you have more time and writing is something you're working on, this is a great way to make those connections across subject lines as well. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of a what if STEM activity that I do in my classroom. So this is the paper bridge challenge. The question is, what if you could use paper to hold something heavy? Or you could pose it as, what if you tried to build a bridge that can hold a book using only paper and tape? Or what if you built a bridge, what if you built a paper tower taller than the table without using glue or tape? That is also a tongue twister. All right, so there's 3 different questions. However, it's getting us to a similar outcome, right? So they're going to plan it out, think about it, discuss it. I would typically have them work in at least a partner, probably a small group. And then they're going to start building, testing out different designs. Do we need to leave it flat? Do we need to fold it? Do we need to roll it? A lot of times I will put a cap on the amount of tape that I give them, or if we're using glue, it's like, okay, you get a glue stick, because some kids will want to like paint the whole thing in glue or use a whole roll of tape, and it's not a tape bridge, it's a paper bridge. And so I tend to put a few parameters on that just so they don't go crazy. And then once they have a plan, they experiment a little bit, test it out. We do kind of like a whole group discovery and see which structure holds the most weight, talking about why certain structures maybe worked better than others. We would even definitely use a scale to weigh the items, so that they know, like, if two bridges were really close or different things like that. You could use a tape measure to see how long or tall the structure is. And that's another thing, like, they are very competitive. And so I like to kind of bring attention to, well, these two bridges were very similar, but this one is taller or this one is longer, and different things like that, just so they know, like, not, even if they're very similar, they're not exactly the same. And so there's no way we could equally compare and compete unless that's what you want to involve in your project. That's just a conversation we typically have. And then so when you measure, if your students are learning standard versus metric, or if you just want to kind of open them up to the world of the U.S. has a measurement system, and different places have a measurement system. And so you could also even have them graph, like, each try. So with their own bridge, like, how many pennies held the first try, how many held the second try, etc. Or they could graph, like, as you go around and test each bridge. So those are all different types of ways you can incorporate that math component. All right. So the next time you're curious about how the world works or want to get kids excited about STEM, try a what if experience. It's a simple way to turn everyday questions into meaningful learning moments. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow the show, leave a review if you're loving it, and share it with a fellow educator, parent, or STEM enthusiast. I'd love to hear your favorite what if questions or experiments that you're doing. Drop them in the comments. This is Courtney, and you've been listening to The STEM Spark, where curiosity sparks creativity. Bye.